Well, good evening. Welcome to the Partage Wine Club dinner of October 22nd, 2020. My name is Patrick Will. I am the Vice President of an importing company by the name of Vintus, and we are the importers for 3 of the 7 wines you're going to have with this wonderful meal prepared by Chef Yuri this evening. 7 courses, 7 wines. That's a challenge if I ever heard of one. In any event, Nicolas has asked me if I would give a little bit of a background for you on the wines. And a little bit of a background on the regions in France from which these wines originate. So thank you so much for inviting me. I'll make this brief. We're going to just give you hopefully information that will enhance your experience and your pleasure in this dining and drinking experience. So the theme of tonight's dinner is Loire Valley and Bordeaux, 2 wonderful regions in France, of course, world-renowned, very different in most ways, but similar in the sense of they're both rather bucolic regions with rolling hillsides, no spectacularly steep terrain or anything like that, like you find in the Rhone Valley, but very temperate regions, and also they share some great varieties. Cabernet Franc is important in both. Sauvignon Blanc, of course, is very important in both. We'll have examples of both of those this evening as part of the menu. So what I'd like to do with this, go through these 2 regions very briefly and talk about each of the wines in turn. I am going to not hop around to accommodate the menu. I'm going to basically stick with Loire first, and then talk about the 2 Bordeaux wines together, and then come back to the dessert wine from the Loire Valley. So if you'll pardon me, that won't be exactly in keeping with your menu as it's set out, but it should be hopefully clear enough. And of course, this is a tape recording, so you can run this back anytime you like and double check. So I will be jumping back and forth, and I'm not going to be sitting here talking to you for 15 minutes, but rather I'm going to, with the magic of Zoom and my limited skills of PowerPoint, I'm going to show a group of slides that will hopefully give you a little bit of background, enhance the sense of place, enhance your knowledge of the regional differences that each of these wines represents. It's a beautiful selection of wines, and as I mentioned, Chef Yuri has put together an absolutely beautiful menu for you. So my only regret is that I'm not there to help enjoy it or to enjoy part of it, but I certainly hope you do. And based on the wine selections and everything, I think it's going to be quite a masterful event. So, as I said before, through the magic of Zoom, I'm going to share my screen with you, and bear with me for 1 minute. Just ignore the man behind the curtain, and I'm going to share a little PowerPoint slide and talk over it, and I will see you on the other side. And there we are. So, again, the Partage Wine Club dinner. I hope I've got that right. The theme is Loire and Bordeaux. Thank you again, Nicolas, for the invitation to address your group. And we will move on. We have about 20 points to cover. Just very, very simply, I'm just going to go through the wines one by one. So again, repetitious, Loire Valley and Bordeaux. That, by the way, is a beautiful picture, I think, of a vineyard in the Loire, overlooking it, very typical of the region there, just bucolic rolling hills. It's an absolutely beautiful region. 7 wines on tonight's agenda, starting with a Puy-Fumé, Sauvignon Blanc, following up with another white from Sablière, Clos du Papillon from Domaine Beaumard. Then we have 4 red wines, excuse me, and followed by a dessert wine, the Cardichon from Domaine Beaumard. So I can hardly wait to get into this. I wish I were tasting along with you, but I wouldn't make it through the whole presentation if I were. So moving right into the Loire Valley, and let me give you a little bit of background about this region. Bear with me, this map is not the easiest to read, but it is a very large wine region, so it's very hard to find a map with enough detail that will resolve on the screen this side. This has plenty of detail, but it's a large region, as you can tell. So if you can see my my little arrow pointer, Loire Valley is the largest wine region in France by square mileage and miles. The river itself is 600 miles long from where it originates in the mountains in the center of France, and before it finally empties out, that's the mountains down here to the lower right, and it empties out finally past the city of Nantes on the west coast of France into the Atlantic Ocean. The river originates, as I said, in the mountainous center of France, which is called the Massif Central. The Massif is the sort of granite center of the country of France. And I call it that because it is actually it contains the largest collection of extinct volcanic cones of any region on Earth, 470 plus extinct volcanoes. So there's a lot of granite, a lot of metamorphic rock in that region. It has that granite has a very strong influence, especially on the Rhone Valley and Beaujolais region to the east and the southeast. It does influence those soils influence what you see in the northern parts, or the upper parts of the Loire Valley. So if we start from Saint-Étienne down at the very lower end, the Loire is just a small stream there, and it flows north until it gets to adding tributaries along the way. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. There we are. And it gets into the region just outside, just before you get to the city of Orléans, in this region which we call the Centre Loire. The region that we just left in the mountains is called the Haute Loire. We're not going to discuss that this evening, but that's the headwaters of the Loire River. There are wine regions up there that make wonderful wines, very different than what we're having tonight. But we'll start in the Centre Loire. And this is the region of Sancerre on the west bank of the river, and the Puy-Fumé on the right bank. There are also there's three associated appellations also: Coteaux-Génois, Menetou-Salon, and Puy-sur-Loire, which we're not going to sample this evening, but important appellations nonetheless. This region is dominated predominantly by Sauvignon Blanc for white and Pinot Noir for red. And we'll move on to that. I am going to come back to the map a little bit, but I want to give you a little introduction to other regions. As you go past the city of Orléans here, the Loire takes a very clear left-hand turn, westward turn, as it works its way out to the Atlantic Ocean. So once you get to the town of Orléans, and you see the towns, the cities, important cities are in bold there, past Blois and Amboise to the city of Tours. That region then is called the Touraine. Over the general department region is the Touraine. And we aren't going to be tasting anything from the Touraine this evening, but you will probably know that one of the most famous wines coming out of there is called Vouvray. And you've probably all had a chance to try one or other examples of that. It's both sweet, dry, sweet, and sparkling. But as we move further west, you get to the department of the Anjou-Saumur, which is named as a combination of the two cities, Angers to the left and then Saumur, lower right. And we'll be tasting wines from both the Anjou region and the Saumur region a little bit later on. And then as you go further westward, you end up in what's called for the Pays Nantais, which we know better as the region of Muscadet, which is basically a monoculture viticultural region, almost entirely Melon de Bourgogne is the grape variety there. So a little very brief tour of the Loire, and we'll be heading back a little bit to show you at the very end. We're gonna taste one last wine from the Anjou for this dessert course. So moving on to the first wine of the evening. Florian Mollet, and I think this is the wine you're having this evening. I know it is a Domaine Mollet, but there are several. So I'm hoping, I keep my fingers crossed I got this right. Puy-Fumé is Sauvignon Blanc, as I mentioned earlier. It's partnered across the river with the region of Sancerre, but they're quite different. They're both their famous white wines are made from Sauvignon Blanc, but they're very different in style. So Sancerre, which we will try tonight in the red version, the Sauvignon Blanc in Sancerre is informed by a certain type of limestone that gives it a very piquant and expressive herbaceousness. It's very high acid, and it makes a wonderful non-oak wine, which is very easy. It's drunk at all the bistros around Paris and many in the United States. Very popular wine. Puy-Fumé, on the other hand, sort of lives in the shadow of Sancerre just in terms of popularity. But Puy-Fumé, I think, at least in my taste, is a more serious wine. It's denser. It's smokier, and the reason for that, the smokiness, comes from the soils in the vineyard. This is an very old limestone with very high deposits of red flint, and the flint gives it, we think, or maybe it's a conceit, but we think it helps to give it a sort of smoky tone, smoky aroma that comes naturally. And you will find Puy-Fumé more often than Sancerre is aged in oak. Not much new oak, because no Sauvignon Blanc wants to be overwhelmed by any new oak, but older oak barrels to sort of give the wine a little breathing room and also develop a little bit of texture on the palate. I'm not familiar with Domaine Mollet, so Mollet, sorry, excuse me. So I don't really know their vinification, but I trust it's a lovely wine. One last thing about Puy Fumé, and this has to do with the soil. As I mentioned, fumé means smoked or smoky, and in fact, the smoky character that is comes from the slate in the soil, we think is responsible also for the name of the wine part of it. So, moving on to our second wine of the evening, and this is the part of the label for the Savennière Clos du Papillon from Domaine Beaumard. We are the importers of this wine. I'm happy to say I've worked with the Beaumard family for over 20 years. Wonderful family now in the third generation in the last 100 years running the winery. The winery dates back to the 16th century. It's located in Rochefort-sur-Loire, which is just across the river on the south side from the city of Angers. And the vineyards of Savennière are actually on the north side of the river facing south. And here you have the grape variety is not Sauvignon Blanc, but Chenin Blanc. And Chenin is a grape variety that I always think of as a we'll do whatever you want sort of grape variety. It is very amenable to wherever you plant it. It will generally channel whatever it's got its feet in. So if it's in limestone, it tastes one way. If it's in tufa, which is a very porous limestone that you find in the Touraine, it tastes different. And here in Savennière, you have a soil which is known as schist. This is quite different from what we saw over in the Puy Fumé. And we will see in Sancerre, and so it's a metamorphic rock, but very, very old, shattered, and very minerally. And the last wine of the evening we'll have also is grown in this type of soil too, and it gives the Chenin Blanc a really interesting, almost aggressive, smoky. You'll see in this 2014, which is still a young wine. It's got a lot of almost sauvage kind of character to it, and a lot of depth. A lot of richness. It was a ripe vintage for them, and no oak aging on this whatsoever. Florent Beaumard, who's now the proprietor of the operation, he's a terrific young man and makes these wines with great care, but no oak whatsoever. As he's fond of saying, the only oak in my winery is the chairs we sit on when we discuss business. So getting back to the wine, the one thing you would notice, and this is the different vintage, but if you look here, you can see on the little screen there, he has a screw cap on top. It's actually, it's called a Stelvin Lux. And about 10 years ago, we started using nothing but screw caps because he said, Chenin, like Riesling, Chenin is very easily bruised by any off odors. And so any kind of cork problems would immediately show up in the wine. So he went to screw caps. He lost all of his 3-star restaurant placements after that, but the wines are pristine, they're pure, and they age even more beautifully than they did in the past under cork. So moving on, and we're back to Sancerre. It may surprise you to see that Pinot Noir is planted in that far north. It does very well. If you think about the issue of climate change, where you have the average temperatures and the vineyards are going up. So you're seeing riper Pinot Noirs coming out of these northern areas. Even in Germany, you have Pinot Noir that does very, very well. Now, even in the Mosel and the Rheingau, so it's quite, it's a change that is changing the viticulture. But Pinot Noir has long been grown in the Loire. In Sancerre, think of it to some extent, the Pinot Noir in Sancerre, it's not Burgundy, and it's not quite anything else in any other region. I think of Champagne when I think of Pinot Noir, of course, is very important there, but it's really its own animal, but it's a very elegant, incisive, very focused expression of Pinot Noir. This is from Isabelle Garalt, the Grand Mont, which is the name of the vineyard. I think you're having the 16 of this. So what makes Sancerre Rouge, the Pinot Noir, so special is that here you have limestone. Now, is a different limestone than you found over in Puy Fumé. That's younger. This is very old, and this is found also exactly the same Kimmeridgian limestone is found in Champagne and Chablis. And you know what, that really informs the Chardonnays from Champagne and Chablis, as you know, and it really gives it an incisive minerally character to this this wine. So Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir grown in these soils display a flinty aroma and a real laser-like minerality. Interestingly enough, this limestone is also found. This is the same limestone that makes the Cliffs of Dover. Kimmeridge is the name of a town in England, after which this limestone series was named. So for completeness, I guess. Moving along, now, if you remember the map, we're moved to the west in the Loire. We skipped the Touraine entirely, and we've moved to the Saumur. This is the eastern side of the Anjou-Saumur department. And here the grape varieties change. You still have Chenin for white wines. But predominantly now you've gone from Burgundy varieties, Pinot Noir, in the form of Pinot Noir, to Bordeaux varieties. And in this case, Saumur is almost entirely Cabernet Franc for the red wines. The white wines are Chenin. This is a property that's an old, it's a fascinating old steep hillside. Chateau de Sèche is a historic property, and 100% Cabernet Franc, aging in older barrels, and some rather, it's something of a cult item, to be honest with you. It's the wines are rather rustic, and they're lovely. They're very honest. They age their wines in an old beer trucks. Interestingly enough, that's right on their website, and I've had them many times. They can be a little it can be a little hard to grasp at first, but once you get this in your glass, give it a swirl. Make sure that you get that beautiful Cabernet Franc, licorice and pencil shaving aroma out, because it's really an expressive grape variety when it's grown in these types of soils and in this part of the Loire. And just a little example of the vineyards. This is a vineyard in Bordeaux, but it shows some Cabernet Franc being harvested. Moving on to Bordeaux, we're going to talk about the next two wines here. We have. This is a vineyard. Actually, this is the second wine on your Bordeaux offer tonight. This is Chateau de Laurie. That is the Chateau de Laurie in Saint-Julien. And we also are going to have the Chateau De Laurie, Puisseguin, Saint-Emilion. I don't think I have a really good map of Bordeaux. No, I have a terrible map of Bordeaux. Nothing to speak of at all. If you think the Loire is hard to capture in a map, Bordeaux is twice as hard. It's huge. It is the largest Appellation Contrôlée region in France, and produces over 1 billion bottles of wine a year as a region. And so it's very hard to kind of encapsulate it. But let me just okay, we have a wine, the region of Bordeaux is essentially bifurcated by an estuary called the Gironde. And essentially, so you have, if you think of it looking directly at it, the Gironde runs north and runs out to the Atlantic, much like the Loire does. And you have on the right side, you have the appellations of Saint-Emilion and Pomerol and Entre-deux-Mers. And then on the left bank, and it's actually a peninsula, you have all the major appellations of the Medoc, which from north to south, Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Margaux, and I always forget the other one. In any case, the major, what we call left bank appellations of Bordeaux. And around the town of Saint-Emilion, which is actually an old Roman development. It was one of the first Roman settlements in that part of France. And it was the original settlement there. That was the original viticulture area in Bordeaux on the right bank, Saint-Emilion. And it was much later that the Medoc was developed. The Medoc, by the way, was basically swampland. And it was all the famous vineyards of Léoville-Lascasse and Latour and Lafite and Coste d'Estrunel. They were all essentially swamp. And it wasn't until Dutch engineers drained that land that they actually found out these large croups of gravel that makes it such a spectacular region. But I get ahead of myself. The Chateau De Laurie is in the sub-region called Puisseguin Saint-Emilion. And Saint-Emilion itself is an appellation. It's very clearly delineated. But around that appellation are 4 sub-appellations, which are also referred to as the satellites of Saint-Emilion. And in the great tradition of naming your region after something that is more well-known, which is typical in France, you name your region after, you name a small unknown region after something that is more famous and so forth. So you have the satellites of Saint-Emilion. So you have Saint George Saint-Emilion, Montagne Saint-Emilion, Lussac Saint-Emilion, and this one, Puisseguin Saint-Emilion. Predominantly Merlot with some Cabernet Franc and about 10% Cabernet Sauvignon, all barrel aged. And as you can see by the very recognizable insignia on the label, it's owned by the Rothschild family. Puisseguin is a great place for very good value wines. You might pay $40 or $50 for just a plain Saint-Emilion. This would be less than half that, chances are. It's a great place to look for value. All of those satellites are. The Chateau de Laurie, just a little background on that. It's a large property in the appellation of Saint-Julien. Saint-Julien has the highest percentage on average of classified growths of any of the regions in the Medoc. You have Léoville-Barton, Léoville-Lascasse, Léoville-Porphyre, Langlois-Barton, and Ducreux-Beaucaillou, and I could go on. In any event, it's a wonderful region, fairly small appellation. It's right on the best vineyards are right on the river, and Douglana is a little bit inland, but it does share that really deep gravel bed that is so important for making these wines. Douglana is making this fabulous Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot-based wines, I should say. 65% Cabernet Sauvignon, 35% Merlot, fairly typical for the Medoc, and a great example, I think, of an accessible, expressive Saint-Julien. Saint-Julien is thought to have, is attributed to with having the greatest aromatic, expressiveness outside of perhaps Margaux, which is the appellation I forgot earlier. There's the barrel cellar at Chateau Douglana. It's absolutely impeccable, beautiful. It's a large property, produces about 200,000 bottles of wine a year. And there we are. Coming back to the very end now, we have the Cardichon, and I meant to try actually have a bottle of the Chateau Douglana here, not open. And here we have the last wine of the evening, which is the Cardichon. This is Beaumard, Domaine de Beaumard again. He made the Savennier Clos du Papillon that we had earlier. Cardichon has been recently elevated to Grand Cru status, so it has its own its own appellation now within the region known as the Coteaux de Léon. So if we were on the north side of the river before, which we were in Savennier, now we're on the south side of the river. Cardichon, there's a picture of some of Beaumard's vineyards in the Cardichon. Terrace steep vineyards overlooking a really lazy little tributary to the Loire known as the Léon River. And here it's Chenin Blanc all the time, very small. Beaumard owns about 10 acres, all very, very difficult to farm. You can't see it here, but again, it's a kind of schist, which is more like a red and white fractured series of rocks. And it gives the wine a very strong minerality. But one of the key items to the character of this wine, which is a dessert wine, is both a late harvest and botrytis fruit. And there you see some of the Chenin Blanc that's being affected by botrytis. Botrytis is a beneficial mold that attacks the fruit skins and dehydrates the grapes and concentrates the acidity and the sugar. And so you end up with a wine with a lot of potential alcohol, but when it's fermented and stopped fermentation at about anywhere from 6 and 12 grams of residual sugar, or more than that, I should say, pardon me, it's between probably 50 and 100 grams of residual sugar, you get a wonderful sweet wine with great balancing acidity, and that's what's in your glass, hopefully right now, as you talk this. I think the 14 was on the menu, the 17 is what came in for the event. It's a new vintage, really elegant, wonderful, easy drinking vintage. The wine will last, Cardichon, one of the world's great sweet wines, it will last 50 or 60 years in a great vintage. I still have some 59 in the cellar, which is still vibrant, and color is very good, amazingly. And Chenin Blanc is, again, an underrated grape variety, one of the great grape varieties, and it makes a wide range of really spectacular wines. I hope you enjoyed the two you had this evening. And here, Florent Beaumard, I told you he was a lovely young man, pouring you a glass of Cardichon. So I'm going to sign off and hold up my bottle of Cardichon. And I hope very much that you enjoyed this presentation and enjoyed your dinner, or you go on with it and enjoy it for the rest of the evening. And bon appetit and santé, and pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you so much.